Yes, folks, I have a message for our naive dear leader, Jacinda Ardern. Please stop endorsing patriarchy and misogyny by wearing a hijab when you meet Muslim women. I know it's March 15 tomorrow, and I know you can't resist virtue signalling, but please, Jacinda, don't wear a hijab, because hijabs, niqabs and burqas are all repressive to free-thinking Muslim women. Now, after a century of fighting, New Zealand women now enjoy equality, but for some strange reason, our dear leader doesn't think that applies to Muslim women. Now try and figure that one out. Anyway, today I'm going to start this off with something Jacinda said about a year ago. Now, most of you will have heard this by now, but for those who haven't, have a listen.
Many of those who will have been directly affected by this shooting may be migrants to New Zealand. They may even be refugees here. They have chosen to make New Zealand their home, and it is their home. They are us.
There you go, folks. You heard it straight from the horse's mouth. They are us, she said. But she doesn't explain how they're us. Has she done any research on this? Now, I would guess around half of New Zealanders would disagree with her. Now, I, for one, would not force my wife to wear a hijab or a burqa, for example. Now, Jacinda, I recommend you listen to this young lady. Hat tip to Alan Pappert for this one.
In a new book, Unveiled, How Western Liberals Empower Radical Islam. It's by Canadian human rights activist Yasmin Mohammed, who was born in Canada but was raised in a fundamentalist Muslim household. Now, Mohammed has since founded the Free Hearts, Free Minds group, and will next week tour Australia to promote a documentary, Islam and the Future of Tolerance. I spoke to her a short while ago. Yasmin Mohammed, thank you so much for joining me. We've had a fairly grim International Women's Day over a number of Muslim countries. We had women's marches in Pakistan and Turkey attacked. In Iran, of course, you've got campaigners against the forced wearing of the hijab in jail. And a British High Court judge has just released a ruling saying that the ruler of Dubai, Sheikh Mohammed, actually kidnapped two of his adult daughters, one from the streets of Britain, and has held them prisoner ever since. What does this tell you?
This tells me that there is a real problem in the Muslim world with the inequality of men and women. And, you know, we talk a lot about patriarchy and misogyny in the Western world. But if we really want to see clear examples of patriarchy and misogyny, then all we have to do is turn our gaze to the Muslim majority world. So those examples you gave are pretty abysmal. I mean, to have women in Pakistan marching on International Women's Day and to be pelted with bricks and to be pelted with rocks by men that do not want these women to have any sense of empowerment is...
And that is what you're endorsing, Jacinda, when you wear a hijab.
Is a pretty sad situation.
Now, I've noticed in your really interesting book, Unveiled, that you believe that in your own life you have felt very personally the kind of thing that you're railing against here, the misogyny, and you relate it to Islam. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, Islam is very clear about the distinction between men and women. So there is one verse in the Quran, for example, in chapter 4, verse 34, that instructs men that if they fear disobedience or arrogance from their wives, that they should beat them. And there are many verses in the Quran and many ahadith that explain that that men have rights over women. So the veil was put on me at 9 years old, and at that point I had to cover everything but my face and hands. So my childhood ended that day. No more riding a bike, no more swimming, no more playing with non-Muslims. all of a sudden now I had to be basically an ambassador for Islam. I was no longer...
Again, Jacinda, you're endorsing that.
Yeah, I was no longer an individual. I was now just Muslim girl, and everything that I did and said and everything about my behavior had to be an example of a Muslim girl, what a Muslim girl was supposed to be. And then at 19 years old, I was put into niqab. So that, I had nothing showing but my face and hands. And at 19, my face and hands got covered as well. So I was covered head to toe in black with just a slit for my eyes.
Now, Jacinda, how would you feel if that was done to you?
And even gloves delivered from Saudi Arabia and thick socks, lest my ankles show. And that's how I had to live. That's when I was married. My mother always felt that I was too difficult to control, so she wanted to marry me off to a man who she felt was strong enough to control me. So she married me off to a member of Al-Qaeda. His name is Assam Marzouk. And, I had a daughter with him. Once I had my daughter, I realized that she was going to end up having that life that I had lived, if not worse. And there was no way that I was going to let that happen. I needed to protect her. I mean, he was talking about taking her to Egypt to get FGM done on her. And here I am holding my perfect little, miracle. And he's talking about taking a razor to her genitals.
Jacinda, would you allow your daughter to go through that?
Perfectly healthy baby. And so, of course I was going to do everything in my power to get her away from him and his hideous mind.
One of the most interesting things about your book is it's a very title, and in fact the subtitle, it's called Unveiled, as I said, but then it goes on to say, it's unveiled how Western liberals empower radical Islam. How do they do that?
I think the most blatant and obvious example is the way that they plaster the hijab all over every flat surface. I mean, we see it all over media. We see it in advertisements. We see it on Barbie's head. Nike has put a swoosh on it. The hijab is everywhere in the Western world as if it's just a fashion statement. Meanwhile, like you mentioned earlier, women in Iran are being imprisoned because they are refusing to wear this tool of misogyny. All over the world, girls are being forced into this. In Saudi Arabia, there was a school that was burning, and the firefighters weren't allowed to go into this all-girls school to save these children because they weren't covered properly, and so they burned to death.
Absolutely shocking.
And here in Canada, a young girl, 16 years old, was strangled to death with the hijab that she refused to wear. Her father and her brother strangled her to death because she refused to wear the hijab. So while women are fighting against this tool of rape culture, you've got other women completely betraying them by treating this hijab as if it's something to be celebrated, as if, it's being on the cover of Sports Illustrated, the cover of Elle magazine. This is something that gets women killed.
Did you hear that, Jacinda?
And we're celebrating it in the Western world.
Now, I've noticed so many advertisements, multicultural type programs representing Muslim women as women who wear the hijab, as if that's the only good Muslim. I've always wondered why that is. But can Western women wear the hijab as, say, a mark of respect? We notice, for example, New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, when she goes to mosques, wears the hijab. Do you think that's appropriate?
I don't think it's appropriate at all. When Western women, like the Prime Minister of New Zealand, try to show solidarity with Muslim women by wearing this hijab, they are only showing solidarity with the fundamentalist Muslim women. They are not showing solidarity with the free-thinking, open-minded Muslim women. And that's the dangerous thing. And that is exactly why the subtitle of my book is How Western Liberals Empower Radical Islam, because they are supporting the radical Muslims when they support things like the hijab.
Again, did you hear that, Jacinda? Now, folks, I think that young lady, Yasmin Mohammed, in that interview with Andrew Bolt is extremely brave. And I think her story needs to be shared. So I've posted a link to that original interview in the description below. You may want to share it with your local Labour MP, for example, or even our dear leader, Jacinda herself. But if you do, please be polite. This young lady needs to get heard.